and today we're going to talk a little bit about how to overcome one-way conversations with IT executives, primarily via email. So typically when we're sending out emails to IT executives and any type of prospect, typically this is what we see in response. If you're not looking at the webinar portion of the call, we have a cricket. This is fairly common. Email is still a very powerful tool, but the strategy behind it has changed over the years. And so people are reading your emails. Data backs that up, but they're just not responding. And so we're going to talk a little bit about one strategy that tends to work better than all the other strategies in terms of creating a dialogue. And one of the primary reasons why we're not getting responses from the emails is we're starting off on the wrong foot. We tend to look at this more as an event than a process. And so the ultimate goal behind any email, especially that first email, is to create a dialogue. What the dialogue does is it implements a social obligation. Hold on, sounds like there's no audio. Can anybody hear me? Okay. Sounds like there was just a few technical issues there. Just wanted to make sure. Perfect. So again, speaking of one-way conversations, I'm glad that this is a two-way conversation and not a one-way conversation. So let's jump back into this. So the dialogue, what this does is it allows us to create this social obligation where once you start talking to someone and then they ignore you after that, that's much harder to do. And so it's much easier to ignore them if there is no conversation. But once you get them to respond, that's what creates this ongoing dialogue and creates really a channel where you can communicate with these folks. And so in order to get them to respond, we need to figure out what piques their interest. And so typically buying something from you isn't going to be that, obviously, and that's one of the main reasons why we're not getting any responses is because we're leading off again with the wrong talking point. And so if we were to write down the top 10 interests, at the top of that list would be jobs. A lot of these guys, the lifespan of jobs is shifting over, recently, and we see that individuals will spend 1 to 3 years within a job. And so there's a lot of changes taking place. And so this is where you can really get their interest. And so the first step in really using this strategy is to look at your LinkedIn network. See if anybody is hiring any IT executives. And then once you've identified individuals who are looking for IT executives, you're going to want to connect with them. You want to talk to them, figure out the details behind the job, ask for permission to essentially reach out on their behalf to a few of your connections. And so what this does is it makes not only the conversation with your prospects more valid, but it also allows you to engage, creates an excuse for you to engage with other prospects in these companies, and maybe even talk to them about selling managed services, which we've talked about on previous calls. Now, what we do next is we take the job information, and what I like to do is I like to start out with the company who's actually hiring and use that as the subject line. There's a lot of different great subject lines, but when it comes to this type of strategy, the company name is probably going to pique their interest the most, because if you say hey or heads up, typically those emails are going to get ignored. But a company name, something that they're not familiar with, which is generic, will probably garner a lot better traction than just a generic type of subject line. I also like to emphasize in the email that this is not a recruiting email, something they probably see a lot of, especially with the lack of IT talent in the marketplace today. But this always helps in terms of getting a better response rate. And also we want to make sure that this email isn't a statement. We're not just trying to announce something, we're trying to engage with them. And the whole purpose of this email is to get them to actually respond. And so stating everything as a question is really the ultimate goal behind this strategy. Now, what we want to do next is, if the individual actually gets the job, this is going to be a great opportunity for us, since we were the ones that helped facilitate that opportunity. We've now created a good relationship with the company and the IT decision maker. But chances are most of the individuals that we're going to be reaching out to, and in this case we could actually reach out to thousands of individuals because there really is no limit to how many people we can share this information with. And a lot of the individuals will be pretty happy where they're at, or they're not going to be interested, or it's too far away, or it's not the right fit, not the right timing. And so for a majority of the folks, this is not going to apply. But we're not trying to find them the job. We're just trying to connect with these individuals. And so once they respond to that initial conversation, we want to make sure that that email is active because these dialogues and these channels that we're creating have a short shelf life. So we can't necessarily just leave this and then when we want to talk to these individuals, go back to this email 2 years later and hope that they'll actually respond. We want to make sure that the dialogue is ongoing. And what this does is it allows us to build and maintain a relationship with these IT decision makers. So once they've responded to that initial email, we want to keep going with the conversation. But we can't just pester them with job postings, so that will get old over time. But we can use a flattery type strategy where we actually ask for advice and opinions. So what this does is it helps them feel good. This is something you'll probably do about once a month, depending on how you feel their responses are. But you'll go back to that initial email string so that they know the background behind this, that you were trying to help them, and the fact that they had already responded and leveraging that social obligation that came with the initial conversation, and using this to ask them for advice. The reason why advice, again, it's a flattery approach where they feel, it makes them feel good because they feel like the expert. But what this does is it opens up conversations about products. So if you were to ask them, for example, if they've had the chance to test drive SD-WAN, and what their opinion about it is or how it works for them, this is a great opportunity for them to say, you know what, I actually haven't, but I'm actually looking into it. Or I have, but I didn't like it. And so that can then transfer into the sales process where you can say, you know what, I know a few companies that do a really good job. They might be able to do something better. Or look, let me get you some pricing. If you're actually looking into it, let me do some of the research. This is something I actually specialize in. And it naturally flows into the sales process. And so this is how we go from job posting to sell, but it all depends on our ability to get them to respond to that email. And because jobs are probably one of the top priorities for them, this is how we really make this happen. So just to summarize, the first step is we need to figure out who within our LinkedIn network is hiring an IT executive or any other type of decision maker that we're really trying to cater to. We can then engage with those companies, build a relationship with them, get permission to share the information. We can then ask IT decision makers if they're interested. Typically you want to do that locally, but you can do this across the board. But this is also a great opportunity to connect with IT decision makers on LinkedIn. So if you don't have their email address, just simply connect with them on LinkedIn and send the message in the LinkedIn invite. And from there you can collect their email addresses and use the LinkedIn conversation and basically convert it into a traditional email conversation and keep it going from there. And it's that ongoing conversation which isn't too frequent but not too infrequent that helps you maintain and build your relationship with them. And the best way to do that is by asking for advice about products and services, things that they would know best, which would also help you understand the marketplace a lot better, but also understand their world, and that will help you transition into the sale. So that's everything we have for today. Hopefully that made sense for everybody. But if there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them now. I'm glad to hear that the audio was working for everybody at the end. But I'll stick around for a few minutes in case anybody has any questions. So Jonathan was asking, well, what if I don't get any response? And then there was another question from Ben. We'll get into both here in just a second. So if there are no responses, I would just space it out a little bit more. So let's say you send them a job posting. Maybe it's just the wrong timing, but job postings will likely be the best response in terms of getting someone to actually engage with you. So just space it out a little bit more until you actually do get a response. You'll find that maybe it was just the wrong timing and now they're unhappy with their job, or maybe they're ready to make a change, or maybe it was the wrong type of job. And so just kind of keep that going until you do get a response, but try to space it out a little bit so that you're not bugging them too much. Vin was asking, how long does this process take? Typically, it's going to take a month or two before you start getting into any sales conversation. So the first conversation may be month one, maybe the job posting, month two, maybe a question, and then from there you would be able to start digging into it. But it kind of depends on where the conversation goes. You can't force it because that'll end up souring the relationship. But if you can ease your way into a nice product sell and discussion where they're maybe having an issue, it depends on whether or not you hit a gold mine. We'll talk a little bit more about how to determine where that's at. So hopefully that answers your questions, and if it doesn't, let me know. The webinar was recorded, Wes, so we'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of that afterwards. So Doug had a question about advice on engaging existing contacts, but not really engaged. And also, as a follow-up, Doug was asking whether or not we should keep this in LinkedIn or use another way to communicate. So let's talk about both of those. As far as engaging contacts, there's lots of things that we can do. This is one of the things that Ensaable does, is we're tracking all these changes. So if any of your LinkedIn connections are hiring IT folks, that would show up on the sales opportunities report. But as far as engaging existing clients, a lot of these folks that we would be prospecting to, we've never talked to in our life. And so having an existing but maybe cold relationship would be even better. And so usually you could say something along the lines of, I know it's been a little while, but I was thinking of you when I saw this job posting, just wanted to pass it along. And so that's the nice thing about the job posting, is it's a relevant recent event, which makes everything much more powerful in terms of the engagement. But if you haven't engaged with them and you mention to them that you were thinking of them, usually it goes over pretty well. As far as connecting with them and talking with them on LinkedIn, I always recommend staying connected with them on LinkedIn because of what we talked about in the beginning, how people are moving jobs so frequently. It's good to stay connected with these folks and try to maintain that connection, because what happens is if they do switch jobs, you'll lose their email address, where if you're connected with them on LinkedIn, it basically self-heals any missed data that may be in there. So, but I would recommend taking the conversation outside of LinkedIn, because it feels a little bit more natural. You'll get a better response if it's just through traditional email. So you'll probably initiate via LinkedIn. LinkedIn will send you an email with the response, and then rather than replying to the LinkedIn response via email, you would just plug their email in there, so that way that dialogue is referenced. One last question from Vin says, how useful is it to keep the dialogue going during anniversaries or birthdays with someone with somewhat automated responses and reminders? So I think Vin's talking about LinkedIn's capabilities of congratulating individuals about anniversaries and birthdays. I think that any touch point is helpful because that will help create hooks and reminders. So my advice on birthdays and anniversaries on LinkedIn is wait until everyone else has responded and try to become one of the last responders, and always make sure that it's a custom response. And so even though they're going to get a mountain of responses, the last ones usually get read, and the customized ones are usually read as well. So Wes wanted to clarify, he said, so we're sending job postings to an individual who may or may not be looking to change companies. That's correct. So all we're trying to do is create an excuse. And so a lot of these guys are going to be pretty happy where they're at. Otherwise, they probably would have switched jobs a long time ago. But what we want them to say is yes or no. Because once they reply to that conversation, that creates that dialogue and that social obligation where we can then follow up and say, hey, I know you were in this space. This is a new technology, or this is a trend that I'm seeing. What are your thoughts? And so even though a lot of these folks aren't looking for jobs, but because the job change frequency is pretty high, you'll find that a lot of these folks are probably interested in at least entertaining it. And so you could use this as a good opportunity to break the ice. And again, we just want to create that dialogue. So hopefully that answers your question, Wes. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions coming through. If you do want to take anything offline, thanks, Wes. Appreciate that. If you do you have any questions you want to take offline, feel free to reach out to us directly. And again, thanks everyone for joining us. We'll send everyone a copy of the recording after the call. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. Happy Memorial Day.